Hi, I'm James Naylor Green, Professor Emeritus of Brazilian History and Culture at Brown University and the National Co-Coordinator of the U.S. Network for Democracy in Brazil. This program is supported by the Washington, Brazil office and is being taped while I'm a fellow at the American Academy in Berlin. This is Brazil Unfiltered. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing Isabel Figueiredo, who is an ecologist and coordinator of the Cerrado and Caatinga Program at the Institute of Society, Population, and Nature. With a master's degree in ecology from the University of Brasilia, she has worked for 18 years on the conservation of the Cerrado with indigenous peoples and communities to promote sustainable use of biodiversity. She's coordinated the Small Grants Program in Brazil for 17 years, supporting community initiatives that generate socio-environmental benefits. Isabel, welcome to Brazil Unfiltered.
Thank you, James, for having me. It's a pleasure to participate.
So first of all, for our members of our audience who might not be familiar with these terms in Portuguese, let's define two terms. What is a Cerrado and what is a Caatinga?
The Cerrado and the Caatinga are two biomes of Brazilian natural vegetation, Brazilian natural ecosystems. They are very important for the whole balance of Brazilian climate and biodiversity, but they are very much unknown by general public. The Cerrado is the savanna. It's the most biodiverse savanna in the world. But when I say savanna, you imagine only this kind of vegetation that you can find in Africa.
The grasslands, as they call them.
The grasslands, yeah. But the Brazilian Cerrado is a gradient from grasslands into forests, and also having a lot of different types of shrublands, what we call clean field and dirty field. So there are several types of different vegetation that are like a mosaic in the landscape. And this brings a very high biodiversity to the Cerrado. And the Caatinga is a dry forest, a semi-arid region of Brazil with a very specific biodiversity, also with species that are very well adapted to drought. So they have developed a lot of qualities to deal with the lack of water, and so they are very resistant to drought, which could be very interesting in this scenario of climate change. This knowledge that the species carry could be very interesting in the scenario of climate change. And also the Caatinga is the home of a lot of indigenous peoples and local communities.
So if we can imagine a map of Brazil for our audience, the big, vast territory taking up so much part of South America, and the Amazon being at that core in the center, and we're familiar with those maps of the Amazon, where would the Cerrado be in relationship to what we call the Amazon?
The Cerrado actually is in the center of Brazil in connection with the Amazon, which would take the northern part of the country. And in northeast would be the Caatinga. The Cerrado is about 1/4 of Brazilian territory, and the Caatinga would be 1/5, something like this.
And the Amazon would be what percentage approximately?
I think 1/3 of Brazilian territory, like 30%, something like this.
So if we were to describe it to someone, and I'm sure you do this a lot, what would be happening in the Cerrado? What are the geographical, social, and economic activities that are happening in this region of Brazil, which kind of surrounds, like a belt around the Amazon to a certain extent?
Yeah. What is going on in the Cerrado since the late 70s is a massive clearing of the natural vegetation to be replaced by monoculture production. During the 70s, there was a lot of investments from international cooperation from the Japanese agency, JICA, to develop sort of a group of technologies to be able to produce crops in the Cerrado. Why is this important? Because the soil of the Cerrado is very, very acid. And in some parts of the Cerrado, the structure of the soil would not be feasible for agriculture in large scale. But then there was this massive investment to develop specific crop varieties to be able to be produced in these conditions, and also all the development of the agronomic package would be like a package of technologies and techniques to develop the potential of the soil to produce large-scale crops. And this was a big investment because the landscape is very flat. So it would be possible to be produced with big machines and big tractors. So since that time until now, there is a big investment and a big effort by the agribusiness sector with the support of the Brazilian government and also international investments in replacing native vegetation of Cerrado to crops for exportation, such as cotton, maize, and mainly soybeans, but also sugarcane and eucalyptus, and also, of course, pasture for cattle production. So the Cerrado now, we only have half of the natural vegetation remaining. Half of it is already gone. And you can see massive areas of soybeans and zero trees in this big land. So in this process, what also happens is that the local communities that would live in this territory are being pressured to leave their territories, and there are a lot of conflicts going on in the Cerrado because of that.
What are the products that are produced there? You mentioned cotton and soy, and the byproduct of grazing land for cattle, for beef production. Where are these products being exported to primarily? Is it to the United States? Is it to Europe? Is it to China?
To China, yeah, most of it's to China, but also to the United States and to the European Union.
So you mentioned the impact that this deforestation and the transference of production to agricultural goods and grazing and the impact that that's had on the region. We in the United States and people in Europe know a lot about the environmental problems of the Amazon.
Yeah.
Why should people care about the Cerrado? Can you give our listeners some kind of context about the challenges that this biome faces and why it should be a concern for not only environmentalists, but other people concerned about global warming and the future of the planet?
Actually, your footprint is much more in the Cerrado than in the Amazon, because most of the crops that these countries are consuming, are importing, comes from the Cerrado, not from the Amazon. So the Cerrado has very little protection in comparison to the Amazon. First of all, because of the forest code. Our main legislation over protection of native vegetation defines that the Amazon must be in a private land in the Amazon. It must be until 80% of protection. So if you're going to produce in a certain property in the Amazon, you can only cut 20% of the native vegetation for production. On the other hand, in the Cerrado, this percentage goes from 35 to 20%. So only 20% of a certain private property must be preserved as a legal reserve, as we call. So the problem is we have a good legislation. Even so, the protection of the Cerrado is much smaller than in the Amazon. But still, if it would be very well applied, it could bring enough protection, or at least a minimum of protection. But you need to consider the connection between fragments. You need to consider the water infiltration in the soil, and many other criteria that could define that this property is in compliance to the legislation. But there are many problems regarding land tenure, and land grabbing is a massive problem in the Cerrado now, and since ever. So what we see is that the legislation is not being well applied, in addition to its short protection.
So how does the land grabbing work? You mentioned that. That's something that has been discussed by environmentalists about the problem of mostly talking about land grabbing in the Amazon again and invading indigenous lands and bringing illegal lumbering and mining into indigenous lands. How does the land grabbing work? How does that process take place?
Land grabbing is a process that has different types of processes to be taken. So most of them are regarding corruption in land register systems. So you can even change the amount of land in certain register. You can attach other lands in a certain register, or you can even create a new register, a new title for a certain land that you already know that it's a public land. And because Brazil is too big and the Brazilian government is too slow, until the government reaches this land, the production is there for 10 to 20 years. What is going on is that during this process, the communities that used to work and to live and to depend on this land are being displaced and being isolated and being pressured over smaller and smaller land, and this massive production over public land that is not private land, that is being taken. The public land is being taken through the land grabbing. And so most of the production in the Cerrado is not legal from the point of view of land tenure. It's hard to explain because it's a very complex process.
So at Brown University, about half a decade ago or so, there was a conference on the environment and the Amazon and the Cerrado. I learned a lot at that conference. And at the time, there had been a discussion, this is pre-Bolsonaro, this is pre-Temer, in which there had been a really increase in monitoring of deforestation. It had radically decreased. And there were really good ways that through geospatial monitoring, one could determine what lands were being illegally deforested and what lands were being appropriately used for the agreed upon purpose of according to the forest law. What happens when you take and cut down trees in the Cerrado to plant soybeans? What happens to the landscape? What happens to the environment? What happens to the climate as a result of this large-scale, uncontrolled agricultural production?
The climate exactly over the land changes a lot. So the temperature increases a lot. So when you have a massive area of native vegetation being replaced by a crop, you have like 3, 4, or 5 months of the year that you're not planting nothing because of the drought. And then you have bare soil, bare land. So the temperature increases a lot. When you have many areas like this in a certain region, you will have a microclimate change. You will also have a very big change in the capacity of the soil to retain and infiltrate water. So the process of machine work over the land compacts the soil a lot and then changes its capacity of retaining and infiltrating water, which is one of the main amazing roles of the Cerrado for the entire region. So when you change that, when the rain comes, you will have a lot of erosion happening instead of infiltration. And all this land that is bare, or even if it's being worked by the tractors, it will be taken to the rivers and to the creeks. So we have this loss of soil, the soil compactation, and the rivers will lose their capacity of retaining water as well, because the soil is covering the bed of the river, as I may say. So it changes a lot the microclimate. And if we see this processing happening in many regions of the Cerrado at the same time, then we will have a change in the climate nationally. And then we are seeing that today that this massive fire is happening in Brazil, and we see all the smoke coming from the north and the center to the south of Brazil. We can see that the process of water coming from the Amazon, crossing the Cerrado and getting into the southern Brazil is all integrated. All ecosystems are integrated. So when you change the temperature and the humidity in a certain region, you will change the entire process of water coming from the floating rivers, and you will change a lot the pattern of rain over the country. So what we have now is a climate change. We don't know how to stop it, but the climate already changed.
So this year, by one figure, made a statement that Brazil is going through the worst drought in 700 years because of the lack of rain, the high temperatures, and the fires. Could you comment on the current situation in this regards and it's the emergency nature of the situation?
Yeah. Well, last year we already had a very atypical year, which the rivers in the Amazon went almost drought, which was very impressive, and we are facing the same, but even worse. And the fires, we are living kind of a hell, because the fires are everywhere. So if you look over the map, the fires are in almost all biomes in Brazil, and this is some new thing. This is not something that we have been seeing from the past years. So what we are seeing now, James, is that climate already changed, and this process it changes all patterns, and we don't know what expect anymore. And we are very scary because the rain is changing, the fires are increasing, the temperatures are super high, and we don't know what to expect. We only know that we need to stop deforesting areas, stop clearing native vegetation, and start planting again, because otherwise this process will increase more and more, and we don't know what we can be seeing in the next years. I'm afraid, because I have a son that has 4 years old, and I'm afraid about his future.
So in the last government of Jair Bolsonaro, we know that the government had a very clear policy to support unconditionally agribusiness and allow for illegal mining and illegal deforestation. And part of the movement, I think, against Bolsonaro was to return to more sane environmental policies to deal with climate change and global warming and all the problems that it has on the country and the world. But nevertheless, the bulk of the attention, especially in 2019, the first year of Bolsonaro's government, were the fires in the Amazon, and they were on international press, the dispute between Macron in France and Bolsonaro about the fires. The Amazon gets a lot of visibility and mobilizes a lot of support. What is the ideas that environmentalists have towards how to mobilize concern about the situation of Cerrado? What are the projects that you've been involved in or other people are involved in to try to improve the education about this endangered biome and its importance, not only for Brazil, but for South America and for the planet as a whole?
This is a huge challenge, because we see that most of people are really worried about the Amazon and not worried about the Cerrado and the Caatinga and the Pantanal, as they should be. Because as we say, all the biomes are integrated. There are no walls between them. So if we are only preserving the Amazon and the other biomes are degraded, it will affect directly the Amazon as well. And there are a lot of springs that goes to the Amazon. There are springs in the Cerrado. They're beginning in the Cerrado. And the same for the Pantanal. The Pantanal depends 100% on the Cerrado. So if we want to save the Pantanal, we need to stop deforesting the Cerrado around the Pantanal. So we are trying to between the biomes and the connection of the waters between the biomes, because the Cerrado is, as we say, is the heart of waters in Brazil. And the waters that are springing in the Cerrado, they go to all directions. They go even, they are important even for our neighboring countries as Paraguay and Uruguay. So the Cerrado is key for even for energy generation in Brazil, because most of energy in Brazil is from hydroelectric power generation, and most of them are inside the Cerrado. And even in the Iguaçu, the water that are in Iguaçu, most of the water or much of the water comes from the Cerrado. So the Cerrado is also important for a national security aspect. So we are trying to bring these ideas on, and also to say that the Cerrado is it's like the heart of the country, and it's bombing water for all directions. And without this heart, all the others will face very severe problems, and for energy as well.
So the current Congress in Brazil is probably one of the worst, most conservative Congresses in the history of the country.
Yeah.
Very strong agribusiness interests control key sectors of the Congress and have influence in terms of making decision and blocking legislation. The current government doesn't have a guaranteed majority in its coalition, and some of its partners are not very loyal to the government. So what can environmentalists do vis-a-vis the Brazilian government in regarding protection of the Cerrado?
We're trying to figure out, but at the same, because it's very hard, because we want to support the government, but at the same time, as they don't have as much strength as we want them to have, we are also pressuring them to move faster and to do what we have space to do. But we understand that even though the government is much more keen to support the environment as an idea, but they have most of the agribusiness power inside the government. So the thing is that we are not seeing as much changes as we wanted to see, but we are seeing some important steps. Of course, most of the energy of the Minister of Environment in the first 2 years was to stop the deforestation in the Amazon, which is very, very important to us. But they are moving very slow in terms of the Cerrado, because they don't have much power to affect the changes in the Cerrado, because most of the land is private instead of public, as in the Amazon. So most of the deforestation in Cerrado can be allowed. So it's much harder to work with the state governments from the position of the Minister of Environment. So what we are doing is we are trying to work with the state governments, and we are trying to support the guarantee and the recognition of the communities' territories, the traditional and indigenous people's territories, because in the Cerrado, they are key for the Cerrado conservation, because we don't have much protected areas, and we won't have. So we need to count on the potential of the local communities to conserve the landscape, to maintain environmental services, and to connect to different protected areas. Otherwise, we won't have a future for the Cerrado. So we are trying to work in this in the state level and the national level to try to bring more recognition to these territories.
So you mentioned the status of indigenous peoples, or the original peoples of Brazil, and the quilombolas, are the traditional communities originally of runaway enslaved people and others who aggregated and to survive in the backlands of Brazil after the abolition of slavery, even before, as they fled the institution of slavery. What's the current situation of indigenous peoples in the Cerrado the quilombolas, the people who come from traditional Afro-Brazilian communities or other riverbed communities? What challenges are they facing at this moment?
Well, it's a very different perspective from the indigenous to the others, to the quilombolas and other segments. There are at least 20 different identities in the Cerrado, like geraizeiros, vazanteiros, apanhadoras de sempre-vivas, fecho de pasto, quebradeiras de coco-babaçu, and so on. The challenge that these guys are facing is that they don't have any legislation that recognizes their collective, their common territory. So they are very much pressured, and they don't have support from the government for a collective land titling. So they are very much exposed to the pressures of land grabbing and to green land grabbing, that we could also comment if you want. And they are the ones that are helping to maintain the Cerrado with their bodies, but very, very, very pressured.
And when you say they're pushed off the land, does that mean that they are going to cities to survive, or they're being pushed into smaller areas where it's harder for them to survive? What is the actual status of indigenous communities, for example, in the Cerrado?
So I was mentioning about the other segments that don't have a recognition. So these ones are either moving to towns or being isolated in small territories and not being able to produce food anymore, for example. And some are being poisoned because of the use of massive agrochemicals in the neighboring lands. The quilombolas, they do have the legislation that can guarantee a common land. However, we have about 3,000 communities and only 50 or something like this. I don't have the right numbers, but very, very small portion of these territories have already the title of the land. So the government is moving very, very slow, and the demand for recognition of these quilombola territories is huge. So one study showed that if we maintain the speed that we are doing now as a country, we will take 2,000 years to have all the territories recognized. So it's almost nothing. They are not moving at all. And so the quilombolas, because of that, even though they have the land recognition in the legislation, they are suffering the same pressures as the others because of the slow movements of the government. And so, for the...
Yeah, go on, please.
No, sorry. Just for the indigenous, most of the indigenous territories are already recognized, but they are islands of Cerrado with soybeans around. Like in Xingu, if you see the map of Mato Grosso, you see the map of Xingu exactly, because everything around the Xingu territory is massive soy production. So all the springs of Xingu is outside Xingu. So what's happening is these communities are being poisoned, and they don't have much animals anymore to hunt because of the isolation of the territories, because they don't have a continuous land of Cerrado for these animals to thrive, to reproduce. So they are being a lot pressured by the agribusiness as well, although they have the recognition of the land. And if you see in the map, these guys are those that are conserving the Cerrado better in Brazil.
So I would like to just, at the end of our conversation today, switch a little bit to the Caatinga, which is something I've been always fascinated with when I started learning about Brazil. Just so our listeners, Caatinga, the word is a Tupi word, Caatinga, and it means white forest or white vegetation. Ka'a is the word for forest and or vegetation, and chinga is white, and so hence the term Caatinga. And it's, as was mentioned, it's low moisture shrubland and thorny forest, which primarily consists of small thorny trees that shed their leaves seasonally. And it's it's for many people who study Brazilian history and they get to the 60s and they're interested in the new cinema movement, they might see a movie called Barren Lives, of Vidas Secas, based on a novel that is set in the 40s about the Sertão or the Caatinga. Could you tell us a little bit more about the challenges that people in the Caatinga face and the problems there and what people are proposing to solve them?
The moment that the Vidas Secas was produced and disseminated, the idea, the vision of the public people outside the Caatinga is that this would be a very, very poor land with no richness, with no capacity of production, and that the population must emigrate to be able to have a proper life. And because of that, the population migrated to the south, to São Paulo, to Rio de Janeiro. And during the 50s and 60s, this was a massive movement. But after the democracy started again in Brazil, and left wings parties started to govern the country, there was a huge effort on public policies to support the communities and the smallholders in Caatinga, for them to be able to survive and to have a very good life, having a connection and being able to live with the semi-arid climate. So nowadays, if you travel around Caatinga, you will see a huge production and many people having a good life, because they developed some what we call as social technologies to be able to live with the semi-arid climate. So most of the houses, they have water cisterns for drinking water coming from rainwater from the roof, with a lot of technologies to clean this water, and to take care of the health. And they also have what they call the second water, what is a lot of different types of cisterns depending on the context of the family and the landscape. And they will also collect water from rain in bigger cisterns for production. So these families now, they can maintain a garden, they can maintain a production of fruits and crops around the houses, and to maintain their families. And also there are a bunch of public policies to guarantee that the government will buy some of this production for school meals and for different purposes that the government needs to purchase food for different programs, social assistance programs. But of course, that the nature, considering all this poverty problem in the past, the nature suffered a lot, and the Caatinga was cut either for wood, for the ovens, or for selling charcoal. But nowadays there are much more projects on vegetation. Nowadays, there are much more projects on Caatinga conservation and many creation of protected areas in the past 20 years. And now the Caatinga is quite well conserved in comparison to the Cerrado that is it's being cleared much faster. But the funny thing is that last year, the biggest driver of deforestation in the Caatinga was the projects of solar power and wind power energy generation. So because of this renewable energy, that is something that we really want, but the way that is coming into the Caatinga now, it's a very bad way without considering local communities. And they also are being displaced because of this kind of project. And it's deforesting a lot of native vegetation to produce solar and wind power generation.
Isabel, you've painted a very dismal picture today about Brazil. And so I'd like to ask if you can give us some words of hope or positive stories about some good things that are happening. You've mentioned some projects like the ones in the Caatinga to regain water and to guarantee a kind of livelihood for families who want to stay in the region. But can you perhaps share with our listeners another positive story or some movement that is hopeful in this regard?
Yeah, sure. Well, even with all these huge problems that we are facing, we still have enormous native vegetation areas with a high diversity of plants and animals, and with local communities, indigenous peoples that are living in a certain harmony with native vegetation and nature. And what we have to offer as a positive thing is that the Cerrado and the Caatinga, they are amazing pharmacies, and you can heal most of the diseases by the plants that we have here. And the local knowledge, the traditional knowledge is amazing and incredible. And there are a lot to be discovered. And also in terms of food, so we have a bunch of nuts and fibers and fruit pulps and different types of foods that we can harvest from the Cerrado and from Caatinga, like buriti, babaçu, cagaita, mangaba, umbu, licuri, that are amazing foods that could be disseminated and then could generate income for local communities. And we are working a lot on that, on making these communities viable, either to harvesting sustainably biodiversity products, but also producing food on an agroecological basis. And we still have many beautiful areas for ecotourism and tourism on community basis, which is an amazing experience for those that want to know better the Cerrado and the Caatinga. So we still have many things, many amazing things, and many amazing people that have their lives being built inside the Cerrado and the Caatinga, and that they have all this knowledge to share with us.
And Isabel, do you have any words for international friends of Brazil, people who love the country, respect the country, and want to be supportive of progressive change? What would be your message to people in the United States or Europe or other parts of the world who might hear this and be very concerned about wanting to help fight against the environmental destruction and climate change?
I would recommend that you be aware where you are investing your money, because most of the degradation and deforestation in the Cerrado comes from international investment in business in the Cerrado. And inclusive, there was some investments from pension funds from the Harvard University. And I believe that the professors would never agree with something like this. But then all these investment power companies, they have the power to decide where to invest the money. So be aware where you are investing your money. And I would also recommend that you consume products from native biodiversity instead of consuming the super processed food that requires a lot of soybean production.
Isabel, I want to thank you so much for joining us today on Brazil Unfiltered. We learned a lot. And I think you've sent a very important message to friends of Brazil everywhere. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, James, for the interest. And I wait you guys here and all the Americans to know better the Brazil, which is not only Amazon, it's also Cerrado and Caatinga.
So I hope you enjoyed the interview today. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like the video. And if you have not yet subscribed, please do so. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast, please leave us a 5-star review. It helps other people find the program. Have a great week. Until next time, até a próxima.